There are moments in Hollywood history when two stars shine so brightly, they can't help but collide. James Garner and Steve McQueen were both products of the same golden age, men who embodied courage, rebellion, and charisma. Yet behind the cameras, what started as admiration turned into quiet resentment. Garner, known for his decency and self-control, saw something in McQueen that no one else dared to say aloud, something darker beneath the king of cool image. And when he finally spoke about it, his words cut through the myth of Steve McQueen like a blade. Two men, one era. James Garner and Steve McQueen were born from hardship. Both knew struggle before they knew fame. Garner came from Norman, Oklahoma, born James Scott Bumgarner in 1928, the son of a carpet layer and a mother who died when he was just 5. His stepmother was cruel, beating him and humiliating him until he finally fought back at 14 and ran away from home. McQueen's story wasn't much brighter. Born in 1930 in Indiana, abandoned by his father and raised by an alcoholic mother, he too grew up angry and restless. Both men learned early that the world wasn't kind, and that toughness could be the only armor. But while Garner turned his pain into empathy, McQueen turned his into defiance. Their paths crossed at a time when Hollywood was shifting, when the clean-cut heroes of the 1950s were giving way to more complex, rebellious figures. McQueen, with his quiet stare and unpredictable energy, became the new face of danger. Garner, in contrast, built a career on decency, intelligence, and subtle strength. He didn't need to brood to be respected. By the early 1960s, both men were stars. Garner had broken through with Maverick on television, a charming gambler who fought with words instead of fists. McQueen had made his mark with The Magnificent Seven, playing the quiet gunman who said little but commanded every scene. When director John Sturges brought them together for The Great Escape in 1963, it seemed like a perfect pairing. Two American icons playing prisoners of war determined to break free from a Nazi camp. On screen, they were comrades. Off-screen, their differences began to surface almost immediately. From the first days on set, Garner noticed McQueen's unease. The script didn't sit well with him. McQueen wanted to be the hero, the one everyone remembered. But his character, Captain Virgil Hiltz, wasn't written that way. The story was an ensemble piece, with many stars sharing the spotlight. For McQueen, that was unacceptable. He complained, argued, and even threatened to walk off the film unless his role was changed. Garner, who had seen much worse during his service in the Korean War, kept his composure. He wasn't impressed by tantrums or ego. Behind the barbed wire. On the surface, The Great Escape looked like a dream project, a massive cast, real locations, and one of the best directors in the business. But for those working behind the scenes, it was a battlefield of egos, and at the center of it was Steve McQueen. The trouble began when McQueen realized his role wasn't as heroic as he imagined. The film's script emphasized teamwork, a group of men planning an impossible breakout. Garner's character, Flight Lieutenant Bob Hendley, was the resourceful scrounger, a man who could get anything for anyone. McQueen's Hiltz, on the other hand, was just one piece of the puzzle. For an actor obsessed with control and image, that was unbearable. He started demanding changes, more stunts, more close-ups, more heroism. He argued that audiences wanted to see him, not a collective effort. Director John Sturges tried to reason with him, but McQueen's mood swings made it nearly impossible. Eventually, production came to a standstill. McQueen even threatened to walk off entirely, forcing the studio to step in. Garner, who had already seen the best and worst of human behavior during the Korean War, watched the drama unfold with a mix of amusement and concern. He later recalled in the Garner files that McQueen's insecurity was eating him alive. He wasn't just competing for screen time, he was competing for validation. Garner once said bluntly, he wasn't an actor. He was a poser. It was a brutal statement, but it came from a place of truth. Garner respected talent and professionalism above all. He believed that acting should come from authenticity, not ego. To him, McQueen's obsession with looking cool was the opposite of real artistry. "You could always see him acting," Garner said. "And that's the kiss of death." Ironically, it was Garner's maturity that saved the film. Instead of fighting fire with fire, he stepped in as a mediator. When McQueen finally admitted that he hated the original script because it made him look corny, Garner offered to talk to Sturgis privately. Together, they adjusted scenes to give McQueen what he wanted: more action, a motorcycle sequence, and a heroic escape. A poser or a star. After The Great Escape premiered in 1963, it became an instant classic. Critics praised the film's suspense, realism, and ensemble cast. But for audiences, there was no question. Steve McQueen stole the show. That barbed wire motorcycle jump made him a cultural icon, the ultimate symbol of cool. Yet behind that fame, James Garner saw something that the rest of Hollywood refused to acknowledge. To Garner, McQueen's performance wasn't art. It was performance about performance. It was acting in quotation marks. Garner believed that McQueen had mastered a screen persona, not the craft itself. "He had a persona he brought to every role," Garner later wrote, "but you could always see him acting." That's the kiss of death. In other words, McQueen wasn't disappearing into his characters. He was protecting himself inside them. Every smirk, every squint, every calculated silence was part of an image he never wanted to break. Garner's critique cut deep because it came from someone who had lived the same pressures: fame, expectation, and the temptation to play it safe. But Garner's philosophy was different. He believed that an actor's job was to be vulnerable, to let the audience see the real person underneath. For him, authenticity was strength. For McQueen, vulnerability was weakness. That difference defined them. Their rivalry didn't explode publicly. It was more of a cold war. The two men rarely exchanged harsh words, but the tension was obvious. Garner's colleagues noticed that McQueen often mimicked his style, both on screen and off. At first, Garner brushed it off. But eventually, he began to feel that McQueen was copying not just his gestures, but his entire approach to being a leading man: the charm, the quiet humor, the sense of moral authority. When Garner finally spoke about it years later, his words were brutally honest but not cruel. He said McQueen was a man trapped by his own image, a guy who tried so hard to look real that he forgot how to be real. That observation struck a nerve in Hollywood, where so many stars were guilty of the same thing. As McQueen's fame grew, so did his control issues. He became known for counting lines in his scripts, making sure no one, not even legends like Paul Newman, had more dialogue than he did. During the making of The Towering Inferno in 1974, McQueen's obsession with status reached its peak. He demanded top billing and even measured the size of his name on the movie posters compared to Newman's. When he discovered Newman had 12 more lines of dialogue, he reportedly exploded with rage. Brothers in conflict. For all their differences, James Garner and Steve McQueen were strangely connected, like two brothers who admired and resented each other in equal measure. McQueen, restless and suspicious, often treated Garner with a mix of jealousy and dependence. Garner, older and calmer, saw McQueen's behavior as that of a troubled younger sibling who didn't know how to handle success. Their relationship swung constantly between camaraderie and quiet hostility. During the years after The Great Escape, they rarely worked together again, but their paths kept crossing in social circles and Hollywood events. Garner had little patience for gossip or competition. McQueen thrived on both. At times, their mutual respect seemed genuine. At others, the tension was undeniable. Behind the scenes, McQueen's insecurities began to seep into his personal life, and soon even Garner found himself dragged into the chaos. There was a moment, one that would later become Hollywood legend, when McQueen allegedly accused Garner of having an affair with his wife, Neela Adams. The rumor came out of nowhere, a symptom of McQueen's growing paranoia and controlling nature. Neela later admitted that her husband's jealousy was suffocating, that he saw betrayal in every shadow. Garner, stunned by the accusation, dismissed it immediately. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. To him, it was one more sign that McQueen's demons were winning. He didn't trust anyone, Garner once said. Not his friends, not his co-stars, not even the people who loved him. It was the kind of insight that only someone who had seen through McQueen's mask could offer. Garner didn't hate him, he pitied him. McQueen's volatility often spilled over into violence and control. Neela Adams later revealed disturbing moments from their marriage. Nights when McQueen's temper turned physical, and one incident when he held a gun to her head during an argument. The public never saw that side of him. To fans, he was still the cool rebel who raced cars and broke hearts. But Garner knew the truth. That McQueen's cool wasn't confidence. It was armor. It was a wall built to hide the insecurity he never conquered. In contrast, Garner's life at home was stable and grounded. His marriage to Lois Clark lasted nearly 6 decades, a rare achievement in Hollywood. They had their share of challenges, even separations, but there was love and mutual respect at the core of their relationship. Garner often said that Lois saved him, that she gave him the family he had lost as a child. McQueen, despite his fame, never found that kind of peace. Diverging paths. By the 1970s, James Garner and Steve McQueen had become symbols of 2 very different versions of Hollywood manhood. McQueen embodied the rebel, the loner who thrived on danger, speed, and self-destruction. Garner represented something steadier, the man of principle who didn't need chaos to feel alive. Their careers, like their personalities, began to move in opposite directions. McQueen's fame reached a fever pitch. Films like Bullitt, Le Mans, and The Getaway made him a box-office powerhouse. He had the cars, the money, the women, and the power to demand anything he wanted. But underneath the success, the same insecurities kept chasing him. The control issues that once drove his ambition were now eroding his relationships. He became increasingly reclusive and paranoid, surrounding himself with yes men and isolating himself from the few friends he had left. Garner watched from a distance, saddened but unsurprised. He'd seen this story before. In war, in Hollywood, and in human nature. Garner's own path couldn't have been more different. After serving in the Korean War, where he was wounded twice, he knew what real fear and pain looked like. Fame didn't intimidate him because life already had. That perspective gave him an emotional balance that McQueen never achieved. Garner moved easily between film and television, starring in The Rockford Files, a series that showcased his intelligence, humor, and quiet toughness. While McQueen was fighting studios and chasing image, Garner was winning audiences by simply being himself. Off-screen, Garner's integrity made him one of the most respected men in Hollywood. He spoke out against bullying on set, fought unfair studio contracts, and even sued major networks when they withheld his pay. He also marched with Martin Luther King Jr. during the historic March on Washington, standing for civil rights when many stars stayed silent. His politics were clear, his conscience firm. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he just couldn't stand injustice. End of the road. Fame, like speed, has a price. And for Steve McQueen, that price came due far too soon. By the late 1970s, McQueen's unstoppable energy had begun to fade. What started as a persistent cough soon became something far more sinister. In 1979, doctors diagnosed him with pleural mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive form of cancer often caused by asbestos exposure. It was the kind of disease that left little room for hope. The man who once outran everything, fear, failure, and even friendship, now faced the one enemy he couldn't escape. McQueen refused to accept his fate quietly. True to his nature, he sought control in chaos. He spent his final months chasing experimental treatments in Mexico, spending tens of thousands of dollars on unproven therapies that offered little more than false comfort. Against medical advice, he underwent risky surgery to remove tumors from his neck and abdomen. His body, already exhausted, couldn't take it. On November 7, 1980, Steve McQueen died of a heart attack just hours after the operation. He was only 50 years old. When the news broke, Hollywood mourned, not just the loss of a star, but of an image. McQueen had been the face of rebellion, of the man every other man wanted to be. But to those who knew him best, like James Garner, his death was more than a tragedy. It was a warning. Garner saw McQueen's life as a reminder of how fame, insecurity, and pride could destroy even the strongest spirit. He once said, "Steve wasn't a bad guy, just insecure." It was perhaps the most generous eulogy McQueen could have received. Garner, by contrast, lived long enough to see Hollywood change around him. He kept working into his later years, starring in films like Murphy's Romance and The Notebook. Behind the scenes, his life wasn't without struggle. Decades of performing stunts had destroyed his knees, leading to multiple surgeries and replacements. In 1988, he underwent quintuple bypass surgery, and later, he survived a serious stroke. But through it all, he kept his trademark humor. "If you're not in pain," he once joked, "you're probably dead." Unlike McQueen, Garner didn't let ego isolate him. He stayed married to Lois Clark for 58 years, a love story almost unheard of in Hollywood. They endured separations, health scares, and fame itself, but their bond remained unbroken until his death in 2014. He passed away peacefully at home in Los Angeles at the age of 86. When news of his passing spread, tributes poured in from across generations. Clint Eastwood called him a trailblazer who opened doors for actors like himself and Steve McQueen. Sally Field described him as a diamond, a rare gem in a business full of glass. And Tom Selleck, who looked up to him as a mentor, said simply, "Jim was a friend, and I will miss him." Two men, two legends, but only one truly found peace. James Garner proved that kindness could outlast charisma, and that being genuine was the real definition of cool. Steve McQueen gave the world unforgettable moments, but behind his strength was a loneliness that no fame could cure. What do you think defined them more? The image they built, or the humanity they tried to hide? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories from Hollywood's golden age.